Hey there, my name's Mark McCartney and welcome to the What is a Good Life podcast. Over the last 3 years, I've interviewed over 250 people around this question, not to prescribe you with the universal answer, but to help you to explore this question for yourself. I'm hoping the guests' musings, experiences, anecdotes, and curiosities will prompt your own inquiry into what this question means for you. While I'm also trying to share with you what I perceive to be more genuine expressions of the human experience, and indeed more meaningful conversations. Which brings me to this week and the 102nd episode of the What is a Good Life podcast, and I'm delighted to introduce our guest, Nadjeschda Taranczewski. Nadja has a Master of Psychology, is a Master's Certified Coach, and works as a coach, author, and keynote speaker. She supports leaders who want to reinvent their organization as Conscious Tribe, i.e. as a thriving community where people invest in their inner work, understand the big picture, invest in deep relationships, and cultivate conscious rituals. Her company, ConsciousUU, facilitates collective transformation and makes culture change scalable through their blended learning coaching programs. She is the author of the book ConsciousU, Become the Hero of Your Own Story, and is currently working on her forthcoming book, The Conscious Tribe Playbook. In this illuminating conversation, Nadja shares with us her explorations of building thriving and conscious collectives. We discuss profoundly important components of healthy relating, including developing spaces for aloneness in togetherness, creating rituals for sharing more context and our humanity, becoming aware of the transience of our emotions, and welcoming the uncertainty we are often fearing and avoiding. This whole conversation is a wonderful invitation to become alive to what is within us, communicating and sharing our humanity, while Nadja shares so many wonderfully grounded anecdotes to really bring alive the concepts we're discussing. This conversation really gave me further hope of what can be possible within our present communities. I'd spoken with Nadja a couple of times before this conversation, and just like the previous conversations I had with her, I took so much from this discussion. She approaches the development of conscious communities in ways that I don't see many other people doing, in that it feels really rooted and practical and grounded, as well as pointing to and aspiring beyond what is our kind of typical way of interacting within communities at the moment. And if you enjoyed this episode, please like, share, and subscribe if you're on YouTube. And please continue to leave your lovely reviews if you're on the podcasting platforms. You can also check out the show notes below to check out more of Nadja's work, as well as a podcast newsletter where you can read about the reflections that these conversations that you're listening to are evoking in me. You can also find ways for contacting me, whether that's for individual coaching around your own self-inquiry, silent conversation courses that I'm now running, as well as for ways of helping your leadership teams develop greater trust, connection, and relationships. So that's all I have to say for this week. I wish you all a wonderful Christmas if that's something you're celebrating, or a wonderful holiday season or a break. So without further ado, the 102nd episode of the What is a Good Life podcast. Nadja, thank you so much for joining me today on the What is a Good Life podcast. Since our last conversations, I've been very intrigued and curious to see where the conversation takes us today.
Yeah, me too, Mark. Thank you so much for having me.
So as I tend to kick these things off with, it is with the question of, is there a question you're exploring as you move through life?
Yes, and I've been knowing that you would ask this question. I've been going pregnant a bit with it, and actually realized that there probably is something like a red thread that has been part of my life journey since I was a child, as I think is probably true for a lot of people that you talk to. And for me, it was always this question of who am I in community, and how do I build communities that are healthy, in which I feel myself and others can actually thrive and be themselves and be received. Now, of course, when I was 4, I wasn't thinking about community, obviously, right? But I think this wish for a healthy collective came out of a family system that I didn't always experience as very healthy and very nurturing. So this longing for community, but a kind of community that has sort of fuzzy boundaries, that is open at the edges, where there's an in and an out, and you're allowed to flow between these two states, and where there's a place for aloneness in togetherness. I suppose that's been my topic for a long time.
I have to ask about this expression, aloneness in togetherness, because it just sounds absolutely gorgeous. Could you elaborate on that, please?
This comes from a conversation I recently had with a wonderful woman called Martha Newsom, who is a researcher on communities and tribes. And we connected over this tribes idea because, our claim at my company is building conscious tribes. So we had this connection around it. And then she said in an upcoming conversation that I will have with her that she's right now really interested in exploring the notion of aloneness and what that means also for herself and how to experience that in a way that is nourishing to who she is and wants to become. And somehow after that conversation, I kept thinking about that is true. There is a place for aloneness and togetherness. And I do think that a lot of collectives actually have this slight toxicity because there isn't that place, right? There's, we are the we, and then you have to conform to all of these norms and regulations. And my sense is that one of the ways to make collectives more healthy is maybe exactly that, is where do we have spaces, these bubbles for aloneness in the togetherness. So that's, it was sort of a stream of consciousness that came after this wonderful conversation with Martha.
But to me, when you say that, that just, I don't know, it speaks to, some degree of obviously reflection, or even just, I don't know, space for processing, like
Yeah.
almost space for processing what's specifically mine. Like, because obviously we're interconnected, we affect each other and everything else. But I don't know, there's something really beautiful in almost being held by that expression. It's like
Mhm.
almost the aloneness supports our togetherness, or something of that nature.
Yeah. Yeah, I believe that too. I do think, many things in life I feel can be experienced, appreciated more fully when we think of polarities, right? And so the flow between aloneness and togetherness, these channels need to be open, right? And if I want to be alone and make the experience that I'm still held, that I'm not being rejected because I'm being me right now, I might be grumpy right now, or I might be interested in something that the rest of the collective is not interested in, it's probably one of the most important experiences. And when I think of children and observing how parents are with their children, and you are a dad, right? I think as a parent, that's probably one of the most important skills to have, is sort of to hold your child in their aloneness, to hold them in their uniqueness, in their wish for separation, so that they can feel that separation doesn't mean to be rejected, and that there's always a way back. And somehow, if we can establish that, obviously, ideally from a very early age onwards, but even later in life, I think we can learn that. And so the sense that I sometimes get when, for example, I work with couples is that they have merged in a way that isn't healthy. And the moment one of them is looking for a unique expression of who they are, their partner feels threatened. And then they begin to punish them, right? And if the punishment is a removal of love, a freezing you out, then you begin to realize, okay, aloneness or uniqueness, meanness in this couple isn't possible. And then it becomes toxic, because then the moment, let's say you and I were the couple, of course, then the moment you want to do something for yourself and take care of you, then I threaten you with rejection and with being frozen out of this little unit. So I think we play this unhealthy dance in a lot of different spaces, and we need to find a new way to be together.
I think that's such a fascinating point, because, and I think it's really underappreciated, because I think it's kind of become normal that a couple might just become this merging of two people into this one entity. Um, how do you bring awareness to that? Like, do you see that there's a lack of appreciation of that sometimes, and if so, how? Like, it doesn't have to be a standard approach to it or anything, but even just in some thoughts of yours, like what comes to mind for kind of bringing that into people's awareness without it. I don't know, like that leaves some openness under the on whoever is receiving that.
Hmm. Yeah, I don't know if there's a standard approach, but what I'm noticing in my work, when I work with individuals, there's often a point where we explore the polarity of belonging and not belonging, right? And the level, the degree of comfort that your own nervous system has with both of these states. Because I sense, for one, that a true inner freedom comes from my capacity to hold both of these states comfortably within myself. And I think because we are often not, because of all the experiences that we just talked about, starting in childhood, we have this very fraught relationship with collectives, and at least in our neck of the woods, in terms of looking at a global perspective, I think we have developed a very unhealthy relationship to collectives. There's a deep distrust of collectives. We feel that they will be all devouring, and then it's socialism, and I do think we have to come back to realizing what needs to be healed to have wonderful, healthy, and nourishing collectives is actually the fragmentation that I have within myself, that something in me isn't connected, that I cannot be belonging and not belonging and be equally comfortable in both places.
Yeah, because it's a beautiful thing in the sense of being able to appreciate that somebody potentially not wanting to spend time with you for a certain reason is not personal.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like that you can both love me and want to be away from me right now. Like,
Yeah.
and I don't mean in some extended break or something, but even just a trip, some like an interest, a curiosity, whatever it may be, that it's not a threat to us because you have something outside of the relationship or something that we don't share.
Yeah, and again, I feel, because of the way many of us have been raised, this fear of rejection is triggered so easily, right?
Yes.
With the slightest of comments, and I was talking to a client last night, um, because I had the feeling, he sat at the other end of the world in Los Angeles, so we only had the Zoom connection. But despite that, I think I've become quite adept at feeling if somebody is currently in connection, or if they're talking to me, but they're actually completely disconnected from me. So I brought his awareness to that, and I said, what is it that you're doing right now to not be in connection? And then he began to think about that, and after that little self observation, we began to explore his level of comfort of separating when he feels he needs it, and if he even feels that's a possibility in his life right now, and then all the strategies he's developed to do it anyway, even if he doesn't feel he's allowed to do it, which is what he was doing with me. And then I shared with him that in my relationship with my wife, for example, who has ADHD and has a certain degree of bluntness in her communication at times, there will be moments where she stops me short in my tracks when I'm telling her something, and she will say, I don't want to hear that right now.
Yeah.
I'm not interested. And initially, of course, that triggered my fear of rejection, right? So how could she say that? I'm excited about this and sharing something important, until I learned to not make it about me and just go, it's actually kind, because she's saying, I do not have the capacity right now to be present with you. So let's not go down that path, because you're going to be frustrated. I'm frustrated. This is not the moment. And so when I shared that with my client yesterday, he was first mortified. He's like, but how can you say that to another person? And I'm like, well, honestly, what you're doing in a way is worse, because you're pretending you're in connection, but I can feel you're not. And that triggers my rejection button too, and in a much more subtle and mean way. So try saying to me, I don't have capacity for this right now. So we practiced that, and at the end of the session he was like, actually, I think I could do that. So
Yeah.
we'll see where he lands.
But isn't this I've noticed this too in my own marriage where the truth, if spoken clearly And there can be all sorts of level or, shades of this. Like, someone could still ask you to stop speaking in a compassionate way or something. But sometimes
Of course.
it just doesn't come out that way. But there's still something I find so refreshing or connecting, even if it comes with a little bit of a punch. Like insofar as like, oh, that hurt a little bit because you said you don't want to listen to me right now. But it is that, like, if you're met with some degree of honesty,
Mm.
it's so much more satisfying than carrying on a conversation, because I can picture myself in your situation in many examples I have of me being excited about something I've realized, discovered, a conversation I've had, and she just doesn't have the bandwidth to listen to it right now. And it's so much more satisfying for her to just say up front, just not now. And
Yeah.
then rather than carry on in this kind of half interested, half paying attention state, which is all that they have at the time anyway. So it's not on them. It's just to respect, like, not even a boundary. I like what you said earlier about even within the group dynamic or a community dynamic of the fuzzy boundaries and edges. It's not a fixed boundary or something like that, but just to say, can we just almost like, can we reduce the level of traffic that's coming through right now? And it's just a personal preference.
Yeah.
There's there's nothing personal towards me in it. As you say, it can take some getting used to, because it's so uncommon to be on it, or to be straightforward with us in regular life sometimes. But it's so much more rewarding and paradoxically connecting, I find, if somebody can tell me exactly where they are in any given moment.
Yeah. And when I look at the topic of your podcast, a good life in relationship, for example, the biggest step that I've personally taken towards a good life in relationship is to learn that 90% of the reaction that my partner has have nothing to do with me. And again, when you live with a person who's neurodivergent, there are reactions in the moment that can feel very brash and startling, and the whole cluster of how much is she able to regulate um, her own nervous system, and how does that come out when she isn't able to do that. And then realizing that I was making my life very difficult because I kept trying to connect it to me. And at some point, I realized, actually, it's not a me problem, it's a her problem, and it's fine, and I don't have to
Yeah,
fix it. I actually, in this moment, I just have to step out of her way so that she can do her processing. And here we are again in this: how do we disengage? How do we leave space for aloneness? I used to do it by freezing her out. And
right.
then that created, a whole lot of insecurity in her system, and then we played ping pong with that. But what I do today is I disengage, but I do it lovingly, and the moment she is able to come back to me, I take her with open arms, and that has shortened our cycles of frustration and argument to basically 30 minutes or something, and then it's done. So there are these skills that I think we have maybe never learned, or we have lost at a very early age, that we need to build healthy collectives. And I really do think, given where the world is heading, one of the biggest buffers for a future good life for us is the degree of being embedded in healthy collectives. So to have our tribes. So we need to learn these skills.
I could not agree more with you. And the experience of, conflict or disturbance being a really short time resonates a lot as well. And there's something in that. I think you said something hugely important within that too, though, is it's not it's not for my wife to fix something in me or to me to fix something in her. There's like I think there's some probably degree of self-worth or like comfort to have, that you don't take something personally, like, or that it's that you also don't have to, like, you can accept each other as you are. Like, there'll be many times that we can accept each other. Particularly, I think, though, something that supports that is like a transparency just in our daily in our daily how we are. Like, not, I don't mean in some formulaic way of every 9 o'clock we sit down over a cup of coffee and tell each other everything about our lives, but just some simple stuff like, are you stressed? Like, I'm feeling a bit stressed today about work, or there's a time
Absolutely.
my wife is taking care of her mother, and also our baby at the same time, and that causing a lot of stress. So if she says something to me in that situation, like that's just a snap,
Yeah.
and then looks to apologize, I won't even accept the apology because I'm like, you're dealing with a lot right now.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, so it's,
Well, I think what you're speaking to, Mark, is sort of a for couples, but that goes obviously for teams. It goes for families to figure out what are the conscious rituals that we can implement in our daily lives that actually are shortcuts in this level of connection, right? So when you say if we just sit down and sort of have this brief check-in with each other effectively about where are you at, where am I at, right? That already creates context and orientation. And I do think one of the simplest things we can do with others, whether that's our spouse or our family member or our team member, is we need to create moments where we can create context. Because if
mm,
you come to work and you're completely grumpy and in a bad mood, again, I will make it about me most likely, right? I'm like, how can he, like, I just said hello to him and he just sort of brushed past me, and then I have go into my big story about what that means. If we have a check-in, I realize, damn, you slept 2 hours because your child is toothing. That creates a completely different understanding for me. So I'm realizing it's always my own story that I get lost in, and it's very little to do with your reality.
yeah, this context point I think is absolutely huge, because it's almost, and it's, once again, it's not to create some standard or abdicate any responsibility or accountability. You can still be under stress and reflect on the fact that, okay, I may have only slept, but I was a bit of a, I was a bit of a prick. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, I could have been more conscious of that. But just once somebody shares some aspect of their humanity or their human experience with us, I I think everything just becomes so relatable and
Yeah,
so understandable. And instead of something that then ends up separating us, it's like, you've only slept for 2 hours. I've had that experience, or whatever the thing may be. It's nearly always relatable.
yeah.
Just from your perspectives in community, and building communities, or even the initial question of who am I in communities, what what role does context play in that, or how do you see that kind of shift or alter groups?
I think context is huge, because the other thing that happens the moment I listen to your story, I'm not busy with my story anymore. Yeah, so there's also this wonderful flow between me and you that begins to happen when we share our stories. And then I'm fascinated with your reality, with your story, with your perception of the world, with your history, with how you became the person you are. And I do think for a lot of people, even though they may not know it initially, there's something incredibly relaxing for one to not be busy with themselves. And then also, as you said, figure out there's probably more that connects us and our humanity than that separates us. And I think that's a wonderful experience to drop into. So, for any collective, I always look at what is your process, your ritual around telling stories, about sharing with each other something that the other person may not know. And to create a bit of space for that sometimes feels luxurious, especially, when you're talking, of course, about teams at work situations. But the payoff in the end is is sort of a coherence between people involved in the same system. And I think we need that. It's something that carries us a long way.
It is. It's kind of remarkable that it could be seen as a luxury as well, in ways, because the alternative, to me, just feels deeply unsatisfying, chaotic, and really mental. Like, I don't feel as connected to people without that level of context. But also, even from the point of view of just how we're like how we're almost separating ourselves by staying in our own like limits. You know, when you mentioned this idea again of fuzzy boundaries and like I am containing myself very much in the extremities of my body or of my experience, and so that level of connection just feels to be greatly inhibited then.
Yeah, it is absolutely inhibited, and and even worse, um, we have all been raised to mask, right? So we're masking all day long. We're masking how we really feel. We're masking reactions that we have to other people. We are masking the degree of internal suffering we're experiencing. We're constantly pretending to be somebody we're not. So a lot of our potential also as humans goes into trying to be that person that we think our environment wants from us, and that includes, by the way, our partner in life, right? So we are all in this. Sometimes I feel we're all playing the emperor's new clothes, right? So like the thing, the dude is butt naked, but we're all pretending somehow he's not. And so we're living in a make believe reality that very few people are actually feeling happy and self expressed in. And what I try to do in my work with individuals and with groups and teams is sort of to say, listen, what if we just say the dude is naked, and somehow like start from that place, right? Start from a place that actually feels real. Start from a place where you're not well, where you're not successful, where you're worried about paying the next rent, where you're worried about your aging parents, and see what reality can unfold and what connection and possibility between us can unfold from that place. And a lot, I believe, can unfold from that place. So to stop the masking that we have been so, yeah, domesticated into, one could nearly say, is something that I feel we, yeah, again, for a good life, I think that's one of the starting points.
Do you know, when you say that though, when you're mentioning just even this acknowledgement that we're wearing masks, or the idea that, you know, we can look at the emperor and say he's wearing no clothes. I think a part of our big resistance within that is almost just that we don't have an answer then, or that we feel if
Yeah,
we're going to step into that space we have to have a solution.
yeah,
Whereas what you're talking about, and if you just let all that stuff hang, it it's not, you realize that it doesn't have to be a solution. You're not going to fix everyone's problems. You may never, someone, and whether we need to be fixed or not, you know, there's obviously other questions there, but I mean, like, then I think we really can fall into a place of curiosity, like, or an acknowledging that there's so much we don't know.
mm,
And I think there, that really is the thing that allows us to be together. And when you talk about community, I think that's what, for me anyway, I just like to be with people. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't need to provide a solution or an answer. I just need to be maybe a bit curious and fall into a sense of being with these people.
yeah. And I think, Mark, what you just addressed is hugely important, which is we are very afraid of being uncomfortable, of
Mm.
of not knowing what to do next. And again, I feel, given where we're at globally in with the world, with so many challenges that we're facing collectively now, the only true thing to do is to say the emperor's naked and we have no idea what to do next, right? And yes, because I think two things can come from that place. The first one might not even be the wonderful feeling of curiosity. It might actually be despair. But
Mm.
to not be afraid of our despair either, because what I've noticed in, again, the work that I do with individual clients is when I create a container for them where they can feel their despair, they often first really reject going in there, because like the fear is, I will go in there and it's like a black hole. I will never come out again. But that doesn't actually happen, because our nervous system has this amazing capacity for self regulation. And if you feel connected in your despair, so that's where community or connection to another person can create just this wonderful holding. And then to realize, okay, I'm in despair for a while, and then my body is doing something else, and suddenly I'm already in a different place. And from that place, I can connect to my curiosity. And in groups, we can do the same thing. So one of the big teachings that I learned in my own life was to not be so mortified of my own experience, but to actually allow myself to have it, and then notice my body's not made in a way that I will be stuck in the same place forever unless I perpetuate it through my actions. So, let's be in the not knowing, in the discomfort, in the despair together until our curiosity gets the better of us and we go, okay, what do we do now?
I think that's beautiful. There's almost like a sense of us, and this isn't to say that despair isn't difficult, that life isn't challenging, but I don't think we're as fragile maybe as we think we are in the uncertainty or the unknowing. You said it. You had a beautiful expression there of not being mortified of my own experience. Could you, because I think that's a huge thing for many people. Could you explain even how that became something that you like even became aware of, or even then began to work with, or to understand, or to realize?
So, yeah, it's a good question. How did I discover this? Interestingly, I started doing therapy quite young. So I developed a pretty sticky eating disorder when I was 16, and that lasted for about 10 years. And I was in therapy during this whole time. And for a long while, what I actually felt therapy was doing is helping me find more reasons for why I was being so miserable and why I wasn't functioning normally, right? So and I don't want to discredit all of my therapists, but I do feel that in some of the more traditional models of therapy, what is actually missing is sort of a repetition and connecting us to our resourcefulness, to our resilience. And so I felt I was just dropping deeper and deeper, deeper into this rabbit hole and discovering all these horrible details about my family and the war and the concentration camps and horrible things, which were all perfectly good reasons to be miserable. And the turning point for me was probably when I discovered a more body oriented approach to healing, because my body was very clear that every state I moved into was only going to last as long as it needed to last. So I would have moments when I was laying on a table of a body worker and bawling, but I wasn't bawling for 2 hours. I was bawling, usually for 10 minutes. And then, so there was this ebb and flow, and to become present to that really informed the way that I work with my clients today, because I realized also as a practitioner, we don't have to be afraid of the emotions that our clients have, because again, they are not designed by nature to be in one place forever. So to hold somebody and then to learn that I could hold myself in these ebbs and flows was liberating, I would say, because suddenly I was like, oh my God, I'm changing all the time. And I had the wrong lens. Yeah. Sometimes you just need to narrow in a bit more and go over the course of an hour. How many different states do I actually experience? And to come back to this, dexterity that your daughter has in heaps and bounds, right? I mean, she can cycle through 8 emotions in 2 minutes and be in them fully. And we all have that capacity. We've just lost it. So to notice the subtle differences in states of being, and to go with that flow and not be so, again, mortified when today I wouldn't even really say anymore I have a bad day, because even that's too big of a measurement. I might have a bad hour, yeah, if it's a lot. So, and then to go, well, and in the next hour something else happens, because then I was having this wonderful conversation with Mark, and after that I felt completely different, and to notice those things.
When you're saying that, it kind of makes me think that the uncertainty in some ways is our salvation. In that, I feel this now, but I don't know what I'm going to feel like in 5 minutes, in 10 minutes, in whatever it may be. But also what you said there that I think is such a interesting part, because you've noted already in groups, like, if you do start to feel these things, despair may be the thing that comes over you. I remember when I started to be more present to some of my own emotions, it would almost felt like I was going a bit mad or something, in the sense of I could see that I go from either angry, loving, what all of these things in microseconds. And it's almost, it can feel like a lot to hold initially, because we're so, as you
Yeah.
say, we're so not used to this. Like, even in your experience there of maybe crying for 10 minutes, even then, this beautiful awareness of, but it lasted 10 minutes and then I experienced something else too. It doesn't diminish, deny, disavow, reject. It's just all here. And I honestly think that is one of the bigger realizations that we could make with our emotional landscape.
Mm. I think you just said something really important there, Mark, which is having a new experience doesn't discount the previous one.
Yeah.
And I think there is this nearly, it's often a very young childlike part in us that feels, well, if I now let go of my anger and allow something else to come in, or if I allow to let go of my sadness and allow for something else to come in, that somehow makes you think that I wasn't serious about what I just experienced. And that's important to realize that's not true. Yeah, so to hold myself and others in this compassion of, no, what you're feeling in the moment is very true, and it can be different in 2 minutes or in 30 seconds, and it still doesn't discount that you had this experience, right? So to believe ourselves what we're feeling in the moment, and for me to believe you what you're feeling, and to hold that space for possibility that it can be different. And I think that's a wonderful gift to give to each other, right? To, because you know, you're not doing that with your daughter to nail her down and say, well, but a minute ago you were crying, what are you laughing now? Because that would be crazy, right? But I think we've experienced that,
Yeah.
we learned this somewhere. We learned that, no, you need to be consistent, and to be taken seriously in whatever you're experiencing, this needs to last. And so we learned to stretch things out and sort of make them artificially longer.
Yeah.
And to regain our dexterity, that maybe that's one of the future skills that we need, right? So to the fuzziness, the not knowing, the unclarity, the sudden changes, all of that is part of what we're going to have to deal with a lot more as time unfolds. So to come back to the state of a nearly of a child that has this quality of moving in and out of these inner rooms in great speed.
When you said that, it made me think of, I remember my wife saying to me, but you said that 30 minutes ago. And I said, did you see my emotional state 30 minutes ago? And, this wasn't something directed at her. This was just me about a decision we were going to make on something.
Yeah.
And I just said, like, this, did you see the level of stress that I was under, or something like that? And I think this dexterity you speak of is so important, because we get so hung up on the words and the mental aspect of it.
Mhm.
And even as you described there in your initial experiences with therapy, and I think I hold very similar views to you in that I don't discount therapy. I saw a therapist in my early 30s. I think it was a very important first steps along a process. But like you, I found certain elements of it at some point to be a little bit and different modalities of therapy, of course, but sometimes a little bit punishing, in that I don't know, where's the love, where's the joy, where's the playfulness. And I'm not discounting the difficulties of certain experiences, but I'm more than just my trauma or my sorrow. So for you, just what was that experience like, to kind of come out, like to switch almost from digging down deeper into what were very real and good reasons for why one may feel like why one might feel suffering. What was that kind of transition like into, this is part of it and there's more as well?
Maybe part of it was connected to actually an intellectual insight, sort of, becoming more aware through studying psychology how our mind actually works, right? And whereas in the past I would have probably held this opinion that I have this camera, I'm recording my life, and when I have a memory, I'm looking at this recording because this is what happened. And then to discover through the neurosciences that I was studying that that couldn't be further from the truth, because there is no camera, I'm not recording anything. I have this very fragmented data points that in the moment I have a memory, I'm actually reassembling them also based on the current mood that I currently have. So I'm currently projecting my past. And then I thought, oh, well, if I make this up, then I could also make up a better story, because then I'm free to invent my past to some degree. And I know that this is where it gets a little woo woo, because I'm not saying that I don't acknowledge that some, for me personally, traumatic events happened in my past. But at the same time, I realized I can either sort of feed that wolf, as one of my therapists called it, and continue to think about it a lot, and bring up these images over and over again, so that they become like a repetitive habit of remembering the worst of my life, and then not surprisingly often feeling quite awful in the present. Or I could not do that. And so when I work with clients today, what I'm trying to portray to them is we can go into your past, and I'm very happy to go there if and when it's needed. But I'm actually less interested in the story, because frankly, that story is made up to probably 80 to 90%, and I'm more interested in what is the resonance that thinking of this creates in your system in the here and now, because that's the only point where you can find an integration, and a solution if you want. So then they notice, we may start the session with them thinking of something awful that happened, but when I bring them back to what are you noticing right now, then they begin to observe, oh, right now I'm feeling awful. I have this, big lump in my chest, and my solar plexus and everything is tight and it feels like a stone. And then I just invite them to be present with that stone for a while, and not try to make it go away, but really feel it. And surprise, surprise, suddenly the stone is not a stone anymore. It's a pebble. It gets smaller. It changes in quality, right? And then to notice we all still have this dexterity. And the only reason why we think we don't is because we're so busy curating our library of past events. If we stay here, yes, that happened, but it doesn't have to matter anymore here and now. So for me, also, that has become quite the insight around trauma work, right? Because I feel we have, on the one hand, I do think it's really good that we now acknowledge that a lot of our reality is really built on a lot of unprocessed trauma. However, at the same time, I also think we can now get quite hung up with this feeling that it has to be this huge process to, unearth all of our trauma first and then deal with it somehow. And again, I think if we bring it back to this moment in time, it doesn't discount it, but it resolves in a very different way, and it integrates in the body in a very different way. So for me, that was the, understanding that my memories are not actually what I thought they were. That was maybe the beginning of this journey.
It's always so interesting how, even though I often think that more thinking won't get us out of some of the scenarios that we're in, how it can be an intellectual insight, like how it often is even an intellectual insight that precipitates some of the letting go of the mind, if you know what I mean. Even if it's just to observe the mind's thoughts and go, man, I know that's not real. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, and it can almost be quite liberating in that sense. When you think of from some of the things you're describing here, like, being present to our experiences right now, seeing the fluctuations and the changes and the impermanence that is just continuously occurring, the dexterity even in acknowledging that things change within the other person. Then also even just the significance of context, and making ourselves more aware of different contexts, being in other people's lives, other people's stories, even if it initially opening ourselves to uncertainty, that we can move through that uncertainty and even into despair, and then maybe curiosity. When you were mentioning at the start, just this idea of conscious communities, how do you see this evolving, or how do you see this integrating? And I must say, usually when I hear the expression conscious community, I almost think it almost
I
jars
know.
me a little bit in the sense, because I think it's usually meant quite disingenuously. But having spoken with you a couple of times, and even knowing what you lean into and address, it doesn't jar me when I hear it coming from your mouth. So if you wouldn't mind just kind of, I don't know, just describing how this evolves, or what you think we require as people to kind of move from, I don't know, this very static friction kind of state that we seem to be in at the moment.
So yeah, and firstly, I share your discomfort. Actually, I also often have this moment of cringe when I hear these words used in a specific context. And for me, so I try to rebrand it in myself and go, I do think that communities are essential. We need them, right? And we need them um, on the ground. So we need them where we live so that somebody can cook us soup when we're not well. And I think we also need them in virtual spaces, or they can be incredibly powerful in virtual spaces. And just on a side note, I watched this wonderful documentary on Netflix yesterday about a young man who was bound to a wheelchair and had sort of a degenerative disease, a muscle disease that basically made him, atrophy, and he died with I think 2025. And he had a whole new life in World of Warcraft. So he was playing online, and in this game nobody knew that he was disabled because it didn't matter, right? So he had an alternative body, and his parents initially thought, well, I mean, it's a waste of time, but what else would he be doing? So okay, they tolerated it, and after his death they found out what a rich life and what a deep group of friends he had built over the years of him gaming in this online world. So I wouldn't discount also online communities. I think they need to be different levels. And for me, I would mark the difference between, sort of any community and what I would call a conscious community or conscious tribe, is that people in this collective ideally dedicate themselves to some degree of inner work. Yeah, so meaning, and that brings us back to the beginning of our conversation, if I cannot be comfortable with togetherness and aloneness, right, if I can't flow between these different states in me, it's going to be very difficult for you to be there with me without constantly feeling drained, because you're so busy with reassuring me and making and regulating my nervous system. So the inner work that I talk about is not for the purpose of just navel gazing. It's for the purpose of what are the skills that I need to learn to regulate myself. Yeah. Then the second aspect for me is to always maintain sort of a bigger picture view, because even if you should live with a remote community somewhere in the woods, you're still connected to life, right? So, and not just to, well, not just to quote, but so obviously then you're connected to the grounds you live on. That's amazing, and you're connected to other communities somewhere else. But the same is true for you being in a city. So I think we need to maintain this meta perspective of what we do matters. And we're not isolated. And I don't care how privileged your community is, we're always dependent on other communities. So to and ultimately we're dependent, of course, on Mother Earth and maintaining this ecosystem. So to create these little, I recently read this term of islands of coherence, to connect them into ecosystems of coherence. That for me is the bigger picture view. Then I feel it's the investment in truly deep relationships, because what makes us most happy at the end of the day is the relationships that we have, right? Is to feel that sense of belonging is really important, and have the space for my aloneness as well, but deep relationships. And then finally, to maintain the whole process, for me, I would call that conscious rituals, but you could also say, what are our processes? What are our um, yeah, how do we make sure that we are still on the right track? So what are the things that we established? For example, we earlier talked about maybe a little ritual of a check-in, so that we can give context to the experience that we're having right now and how we're showing up in a group, right? It could be going for regular walks. It could be to give every person in the group enough time to schedule alone time, so that they can just do whatever they want to do without having to mind the collective. So those are the things for me that I feel are the markers, right? The inner work piece, the bigger picture, the deep relationships, and the conscious rituals. And that is the soil on which a healthy collective can be built.
Maybe it's a mark of kind of how individual society can be, but that expression you said of so someone can bring me soup when I'm sick. Um, do you know what I mean? The idea that that could feel so almost foreign in modern life. Do you know what I mean? That if they weren't either a very good friend or a partner or a family member, that we wouldn't just sort of do this for each other. I remember being so kind of impressed by my neighbors, and even in the wider kind of, around a few blocks around where I live, like people that I just say hello to, and you might just have a small engagement with them or chat. But I was amazed that when Ava came into the world, how many people offered to cook us meals, to take our dog for a walk, even look after our dog. Obviously, when we were in the hospital for a few days, like there's so many things that occurred where people were just really like happy to give, and drop food over that they cooked themselves. It's amazing how easily kind of, I don't mean triggered in a negative way, but how easily we can trigger that desire to be in community with each other. Whether it's a big moment in life, or just by having these simple touch points of hello, how are you, how are you doing today? Like, it's amazing how sometimes I think we think society, we're so far away from what we could be, that it's almost impossible. But I think the main touch points that you're referring to here, I think there's so much more within our grasp than we actually think they are.
And I think you're right, Mark. I do think at the end of the day, um, we we enjoy being helpful. We enjoy being of support to somebody. I really do think that nourishes a very deep part in us, but in our so highly individualized system, right? And I think the way capitalism has played out here has severed a lot of these very natural impulses in us for the sake of making it make coming out ahead of everybody else for competition. So there is a process of relearning to be in community that is now needed. And sort of a personal example, because I feel that in my life too, because obviously we have friends and we have family, but I thought, can I build a community without having to move in with a bunch of people into the same space or grounds? And so what I started at the beginning of this year is what I call a conscious money tribe. A reason why I call it conscious money tribe is that money actually plays a role in this tribe, because I wanted to build a structure of solidarity where we mix people who are more affluent and people who are less affluent, and experiment with the flow of resources in this tribe, right? So we look at where is something needed, and needed doesn't just mean because you can't pay your rent. It may also mean because you are always the person who is giving. So how does it feel for you to need something to receive, right? And this experimental space has turned into this amazing experience of connection, because we're having really wonderful and sometimes challenging conversations with each other, because we realize how deeply ingrained the principles of capitalism and patriarchy are in all of us, and what it takes to shed these layers and really get to the essence of our humanity, which I think is we like to support others. And it feels actually, when we can relax into it, wonderful to be supported. So, I would urge anyone listening to this to think about, what are your coherent structures? What are your islands of coherence? What are your little tribes? And what could you do to build them a bit more, to give them a bit more solidity, so that they're not so easily dismantled when stress comes into the system?
I must say, there's so much of what you focus on that I just think is, and even just a conscious money tribe in that sense. I think there's so many ways in which you, and this is why I said it doesn't jar me when you say conscious community, because I think you're doing things in a very real and grounded and rooted way of like, how does this actually function? How do we do, like, what's this process? And just as you were speaking about that, like, of just letting go of the present structures and systems, because to become aware that the present modes that we live within, they don't really welcome our humanity. And I think, it's not about, for me, it's not about riling against something, but more paying attention to just, I'm going to connect to my humanity because that makes me feel damn good in my life. And it seems to have a nice effect on the people around me too when I do that. And vice versa. If I'm falling out of my humanity and someone else offers their hand out to me in that gesture, it feels really good. And so I think that's a really important thing to kind of keep in mind, that these ideas are not necessarily being promoted. So it's
Yeah.
even more, I'm not saying it's all on the individual at all, because I think to do this in union with other people, but there is a conscious, um, have been conscious of that in this society. Look,
Yeah.
Nadja,
And
oh, please.
sorry, I was just you just triggered another thought in me. I was recently at a congress in Austria, a Hearth summit that brings together change makers from different parts of the world, and one of the people there is somebody I really admire. His name is Christian Felber, and he's the founder of Gemeinwohlökonomie, so economy for the common good. And he was talking about that one of the obstacles they run into is that so often people say there is no alternative to capitalism, right? And they created this acronym TINA, there is no alternative. And he says he created a sort of counter acronym, which is TAPAS, which is there are plenty of alternative solutions, and economy for the common good or donut economy. There are examples out there where things already work in a very different way, and where economy and humanity are not mutually exclusive but mutually beneficial. And so I feel we need to approach these challenges from two directions. One is sort of the structural lens, right? What are alternative models that actually already work in different places in the world, and how can we adapt them to our life? But the other part is sort of the ground up work that we can all do individually, and look at our own collectives, look at our own life, and see how can we further healthy collectives in that sense. And then maybe at some point these two can meet. And I would so much wish that I would live to see the day where we are in a post-capitalist society. I don't know if that will work out, but one can hope.
Yeah. Look, well, this conversation always or speaking with you always gives me hope in that sense. So look, from where we started from, just in just wondering how can I be in community, to building community having fuzzy boundaries or edges, almost this beautiful idea of coming and going, and us being okay with the comings and goings of others, of ourselves, and others being okay with that, to the ideas of creating more context for each other, to understand each other, to realize that this too shall pass, essentially. There's so much impermanence in how we feel, there's so much dexterity in the human experience. Giving as well, like, more credence to the idea of maybe falling into our despair first before we can live with the uncertainty, and before we can move more into our curiosity and connection to allow that process to take place. And then more recently, just talking on the kind of what the pillars are for a conscious community, and these lovely examples you're giving as well. Really curious to hear your response, Nadja, to the question of what is a good life for you.
Well, I just realized we covered a lot of ground this past hour. Um, yeah, so what popped into my mind this morning, because I knew your bookend questions, right? The starting question and the final question is a quote by Howard W. Thurman, a civil rights leader, who said, "Don't ask what the world needs, and ask what makes you come alive, and go do it. Because what the world needs is people who have come alive." And I really love that quote, because I think, again, when we look at masking and how much time we spend trying to be the person that we think others need us to be versus actually being who we are, it's a waste of our life energy and our life gift, and it never results in a good life. So for me, having a good life is finding that spark, is connecting to source, is finding an expression for the uniqueness that is me, and then thinking about how do I do that for the common good, because it's not a solo game. Yeah, so it's a team sport. And I think if we can connect those two things, something quite wonderful and a very wonderful and good life can ensue.
And that acknowledgement of aliveness literally gave me goosebumps as you said it. So, yeah, clearly that resonates very strongly with me. So, look, Nadja, thank you so much for your time today. I've really, really enjoyed it. As ever, it prompted different thoughts, and while being deeply resonant, and also expanded other ideas for me for future kind of inquiries for myself. So I very much appreciate your time today.
Oh, Mark, thank you so much. I really love this conversation. Put me in a great mood. It's already start of a good life today.